Om Namah Shivay. Yeah, this is Arsonist Fire, Way of Dharma. Welcome to all the new members. Welcome back to our returning subscribers. Please like, share, and hit the notification icon for future updates. Our topic for today is a further extension of the previous video of Tokoloshes, snakes, and a little bit of extraterrestrial knowledge. So unfortunately, I'm using my phone. We've been having power issues over here, so expect more content from my phone, and please excuse me. So our topic, we will be talking more in detail about these subjects that I've mentioned. Okay, so now I used to have questions when I was researching about that stuff, about African snakes and Tokoloshes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and I struggled for a long time to reconcile these facts. Let me check something. To reconcile these facts with the knowledge that I have of Western esotericism and Indian Vedic wisdom or knowledge. Okay. So what exactly is the African snake and the python, the aforementioned species? These guys are actually nature spirits. Okay, and most are beneficial, some are malefic. Okay, just like everything in the universe, it has its dual poles. Okay, so there's elementary spirits of the snake kingdom, and there's elementary ones. Also there's earth ones, like the literal earth. They can shapeshift and become a snake just to kind of rationalize themselves into the human conception and thinking. And there's another one that they use for pacts. One of the ways to actually use the snake for pacts is to actually approach it by conjuration of some sort and actually do so. I don't know, maybe if they do relate with the other method that I'll be mentioning now. The other method is to actually create an artificial spirit of that snake. Interesting. Ancient people in every culture and occult system had become so advanced to actually create species at their own accord. In some texts that I heard from Brother Bobby Hemmick, they said the human's biggest mistake was creating another species via genetic engineering. This is not coffee, this is water just before I eat in the morning, so you understand. Please bear with me while I explain these topics to you. The greatest mistake or greatest achievement was to create another human. Okay. So there's a video that I have on my wall about creating pacts with such beings. So how exactly do they create such beings? Via blood magic. I remember a long while back, in 2017 while I was focusing on the conscious community. Everyone was focusing on diet, including I, and focusing on the conspiracy theories or other conspiracies. I used to boast about having this knowledge. The first book that I came across creating other beings was actually Adam Luciferian Tantra. In that book, there's a section where they speak of spirit cooking. Okay, what exactly is spirit cooking? Spirit cooking is creating another being out of certain concoctions. What would be those concoctions? A huge part of African spirituality is based upon blood magic. Blood magic. So, what are those concoctions? The concoctions that I speak of are the sperm or seminal fluid of the male and then the menstrual blood. Those two concoctions can be used to actually create another being, as I have learned by reading Adam Luciferian Tantra, Michael Ford's book. And then I was surprised. Shockingly enough, I think months later after reading that book, there came out a WikiLeaks on Hillary Clinton. It was a video whereby she was caught performing a ritual using menstrual blood and seminal fluid. You can also look it up on the Google Internet platform. You'll find that they actually partake in these rituals and they actually perform these rituals. The elites, they are hiding a great deal of information and knowledge from us. They are monitoring our growth. Why? Because they want to stay in control. How do they stay in control? By using such advanced techniques to stay on top. So going back to the subject of the snake, a snake can actually be created out of nothing, and then it can later on grow into something very powerful and potent. So in the video that I speak of, it was a Zulu guy doing a pact for someone else. Okay, in that pact, they had some sort of a concoction that had blood, and then they had certain herbs that they poured into that thing, and then that herb was then later on mixed with this guy's blood to actually bind the being that they are creating and the one that is supposed to be served with that pact using blood, by way of blood. And then they did so. And then you have to feed it a certain diet, or give it certain offerings over time so that it can grow into something powerful. What's amazing about this in African spirituality is that the beings that are created later on come to be so physical. They tend to have a physical presence, a strong energy and strong life presence. Whereas as opposed to knowledge of other traditions, it isn't that strong. The presence isn't strong. It's largely based upon the spiritual aspect of it. So the being would then grow into something strong, and then you would then house it in your house and give it offerings periodically to actually grow it. Something very, very powerful. And then it turns into a big gigantic snake. The only problem with this is that when it grows in power, just like every theme of artificial intelligence and every theme of any species of whether humanity or alien species, every theme movie, it has a point whereby it realizes itself, and then it later on wants to grow and multiply, just like every edge any species would have on earth. They want to grow and multiply, and the aspect of self-preservation becomes prevalent when such a species is born. So the snake also takes on that form and wants to grow. It then wants blood, and then it wants more servitor spirits under it. That is how it would grow into something bigger, something much more powerful, something that can even be worshipped in those rivers, basically. So it's very, very, very powerful, and it's very scary when you think of this, because unfortunately you can't control it. It will continue seeking more until finally it seeks your life, and then you have to die. That's the sad part of it. And this can happen over a short period of time because the growth is just on steroids. Okay. So what else did I learn of this pact thing? There's stories in African spirituality of people stealing babies while they are in the womb, of certain miscarriages happening just before the time of birth, certain pregnancies that are questionable, and certain such bizarre acts, basically. So it is said that in an advanced stage of giving offerings to that Servitor spirit that you would have created, you would then be required to actually go to a certain number of women. Just by standing in front of them or side by side with them, you actually absorb the growing embryo that would be growing inside of that. So now life is stolen to actually create an empire of that Servitor spirit that you have just created. Very, 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 very detrimental. Okay. And then it goes on even further to a level whereby you have preachers, African preachers, where maybe a congregation, a church congregation is invited to a certain pilgrimage of some sort, and then all of a sudden the building collapses on that congregation. Upon the collapse of the building, many people die, and those people are said to be sacrifices to that species. So in African spirituality, it is possible to actually take over the body of another human being and actually create an artificial form of it, and then later on take over and create a species out of that and create a species out of that person's remains while their soul has been taken out of their body. This is possible in African spirituality. It is possible also to zombify a person by way of certain processes whereby nails can be put in your third eye to disable certain nerves from your brain and to dim and shut off other mental faculties to make you a slave of some sort. So now let me pause a bit and dish up my soft porridge, and then later on continue with this subject. Let's continue. Almost made a mistake by pressing the red button. It would have stopped the recording and it would have fragmented my video in half. So I'm sure you can even hear there's a sound of someone beating or chopping down wood with an axe. this further goes to verify the effect that I'm talking about of the power outage. So yes, let's go back to it. So souls can be stolen, or rather subjugated in a form of zombification. You will be waiting, looking behind the scenes at the person or a force that would be animating your body over a long period of time. Take it as some sort of permanent possession. Africans do very bizarre practices, and it's very, very dangerous to indulge in those practices. Someone's soul can be put aside while another force can be animating that body. In ancient times, in Africa, crime was very low because the punishment of that time would be witchcraft. That's how they used to solve their crimes, okay? And it also is prevalent in days of today. There's people that steal things, or maybe not maintaining your baby, or breaking the law in some way or form. Then a traditional healer would be then visited to actually make you insane, permanent insanity. If cleansings are not to be done at the correct time, unfortunately, you might be insane permanently. This is by the way of taking your soul and putting it aside, not dying, but putting the soul aside. So now it's bound to this physical form that it can't even animate, and it can't even come back to reincarnate as soon as, at least until the body dies. Very, very scary practices of the Africans. So now, we spoke of the fact that the embryos, the pregnancies were being stolen. What are these stolen beings used for? They are being used for medical concoctions and herbs. They are used to feed the Servitor spirit, to give it power and exalt it. They are used to create another species of Servitors. That is how you would then have spirits such as the Tokoloshe and other Servitor spirits in African spirituality. I think there's a force behind these so-called intentional Servitor spirits that are being created by magicians in African spirituality, of course. Or maybe it could be possible that these servitors, upon gaining independence and consciousness, they want to acquire power. But then these spirits, they have no soul and they are just in between. They can't be gods, and they can't be humans. They are just in between. How is this possible? The subtle bodies of spirit, like I've mentioned in the previous video, they are the ones, the mind, the consciousness, they are the ones that allocate certain energies to be distributed in a body. So it is also the mind that has the memory here on earth, that when certain concoctions come together, like in chemistry, they create a certain outcome or a compound. So it would be inevitable to have menstrual blood and seminal fluid to create something, and something doesn't come out. Because the universal mind, the universal consciousness recognizes that whenever there's a cause, there should be an effect. So that's how this process happens. So, but then there's a missing part of these beings, which is what? The soul. Can these beings have a soul? I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe over time. I don't think so. But then this issue of this independence of self-consciousness, it's what scares me. Because even in humans, there's an independence of self-consciousness. And having that independence of self-consciousness is having the I am. And the minute you have the I am, it's something very dangerous, because it gives you potential to ascend to greater spiritual heights and greater power. So going into the Tokoloshe, there's a very simple process of creating a Tokoloshe, which involves a chicken egg, perforation of the chicken egg, mixing it with seminal fluid, and then coming back later to close up that egg, maybe with parchment paper, to then incubate that life. And then after a certain time, it will be born, and then you have a Tokoloshe. But then there's advanced techniques of how to do it, those of the traditional healing, and I wouldn't advise anyone to go there unless you have power to bind these enemies or power to practice black magic. So for a while, this subject used to bewilder me, and I couldn't understand how was it possible that even in Western esotericism, there's no such concept. But then I've discovered that there is such a concept, and it's much more practiced, and it's in the mainstream of Western esotericism. What is this concept that I speak of? I was able to reconcile it with the aforementioned magical practices. This practice that I speak of, I even have it on my channel. One of the previous videos, I speak of magical servitors, creating spirits, basically, But then in Western esotericism, the spirits are what? They are spirits. Maybe I haven't done it for over a long time to see that they can actually become more physical and have a stronger presence. But then when I look at this creation of magical entities thing and servitors, I begin to fear now, because I can see the power and I can see the correlations between the African servitors and malevolent spirits that are spoken of in some magical servitor books. It's a very dangerous art. I can imagine having those servitors that I had in the past, the ones that were working so efficiently for my growth and well-being. Imagine having a servitor over a long period of time, feeding it, giving it strength, giving it life. Imagine what type of a power it would have. It's exciting to think of it. It's also dangerous to think of it, because what if that servitor turns against you and has intelligence to actually come back to destroy you? Which is why I love the method of Damon Brand for creating a fail-safe proof to ensure that you can destroy the servitors when it has begun to rebel against you. This is a very scary concept. It's a very scary concept. And then later on, I come across a book by Balkat Moon. Shout out Balkat Moon. A great part of my occult magical practice comes from that guy's books. There's a book, Creating Demonic Entities, something like that. It speaks of the Daemon and the Keiko Daemon or Kakos Daemon. The Kakos Daemon would be the malevolent, malefic servitor spirit, and then the Daemon would be the good, beneficent spirit. Okay. He says that to tread with caution when dealing with the malevolent. In that book, there is no fail-safe mechanism to destroy the servitor should it go rogue on you, which is something I am scared of. There's even the story of the golem in the Hebraic tradition, the golem which was tormenting and doing nasty things. So finally, with the research that I have and the knowledge that I've obtained from this subject of servitor spirits, I'm able to reconcile most of the African spirituality and the Western esotericism and many more. So guys, I think we've reached the conclusion of this video, whereby I wanted to discuss how these servitor spirits are being created in African spirituality. They tend to have more power and greater consciousness that is just so scary, to a point whereby they become too powerful to contain and control. So you get my point. So if a servitor spirit of a python can be created in such a process, which means you can also create a humanoid species in that very process. I'm afraid I can't even attempt that, because look at where we are today because of such experiments. Anyway, this is Arsonist Fire. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking, sharing. And please stay tuned to the Way of Dharma for more content. And I'll be dropping more content. I'll try to go back to yoga and tantra and doing and balancing everything. And also we'll be discussing Buddhism because it is all aspects of Dharma. Om Namah Shivaya, Arsonist Fire, Way of Dharma.